Welcome back to Beyond the Clinic Walls, the podcast dedicated to helping leaders and founders in the healthcare and wellness field thrive by leveraging technology and innovation. I'm your host, Roby Flynn, and today we're venturing into one of the most exciting and rapidly evolving fields in medicine, regenerative therapies and the future of healing. I'm incredibly excited today to introduce our guest, Dr. Ian White, the visionary CEO and founder of Neobiosis. Dr. White, thank you so much for joining.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Sure thing. So could you start by telling us a little bit about Neobiosis and your mission in the regenerative medicine space?
Yeah, sure. So I started Neobiosis in 2020, actually right when COVID was kicking off. So it made raising capital quite challenging during that period. Thankfully, I was able to raise capital, and working with the University of Florida, was able to save a lot of that money because the resources that the university made available allowed me to distribute that money more on personnel rather than capital equipment. So, I'm grateful for the University of Florida for that opportunity. So I started Neobiosis in the field of regenerative medicine because it's an area I've been working for a very long time, and I saw the potential for the types of therapies that we were developing and testing in small animals and in petri dishes. But I really wanted to be able to translate those to the patients, and so that patients could benefit from it. And I noticed that in the industry, there were a lot of groups that were selling similar products, but a lot of them did not have the qualifications or the training, and the products were generally pretty poor quality. So I saw an opportunity to bring some transparency, to bring some scientific rigor to the industry. And so my partner and I, Dr. Pascal Goldschmidt, who is the Dean Emeritus of the University of Miami Medical School, started Neobiosis in Gainesville, Florida, in order to manufacture regenerative therapies from perinatal tissues to serve a population of patients that were underserved due to the lack of quality and transparency in the industry.
And what common challenges do you aim to solve for the patients and the medical community, and what focus of medicine are you focusing on?
Yeah, it's sort of like an underserved medical population. A lot of the patients that are benefiting from these kinds of modalities are patients that are not getting any relief with conventional medicine. So, for example, one of the major indications that we work with are diabetic ulcers, and there are very few interventions that really treat diabetic ulcers efficiently. And what ends up happening is that somebody that develops a diabetic ulcer will ultimately have to have the limb removed because the ulcer just continues to grow. You get necrotic tissue, and the only course of action is to remove the foot or the extremity. The products that we make, primarily purified amniotic fluid, derived exosomes, and the secretome that's associated with that, is incredibly immunomodulatory. It's also incredibly analgesic, so it reduces pain, but also it's incredibly regenerative. So together, those attributes work very well for indications like diabetic ulcers because we're able to modulate the inflammation, we're able to stop the necrosis, and we're actually able to regrow the tissue. And this is very important for these patients. Same thing with bed sores. Bed sores often are non-healing and but respond very well to these products. But also burns. Burns are a major issue because they get infected easily. They're very hard to treat. They're very painful. And we've had a lot of success applying these products to burn patients to modulate the inflammation, to reduce the pain, and to promote tissue healing.
That's great. And I know you had told me before you were also doing work in the cardiac side of things as well, regrowing myocardial tissue as well.
Yeah, so that's my background. So I started studying regenerative medicine from the perspective of cardiac tissue. For many years, I studied why hearts don't regenerate. One of the reasons why heart disease is so prevalent in this country and around the world is that when the heart is injured, it doesn't have the capacity to repair itself. But what we discovered, in fact, it was another team that really described this, was that the heart retains an ability to repair and regenerate very early on. So just the first couple of days of life, the heart has the signals that it needs in order to be able to repair and regenerate. And so my research then extrapolated on that, where I took those young signals and I gave them to an injured heart in a petri dish, and I was able to facilitate tissue repair unlike anything we'd ever seen before. So that was my Main focus initially was cardiac regeneration in academia, and then I've since transitioned to the commercial side where we develop products incorporating the idea of these young signals in order to promote tissue repair in older individuals.
That is so fascinating. We're so thankful to have people as intelligent as you in this world for real. So I know you're incredibly intelligent, and for our audience, could you explain more in like layman's terms what regenerative medicine is and how these therapies that you offer at Neobiosis work to promote that healing and repair?
Yeah. So early in my career, I was introduced to the idea of heterochronic parabiosis. And all that means is an experiment where a young individual and an old individual were connected by their blood supply. And what the scientists at Harvard observed during that process was that the young individual shared something with the old individual, and the old individual appeared to get younger. But not only did they appear to get younger, so coat color came back, grip strength came back, cognitive ability improved, these kinds of things. But also they healed much faster. Because as we know, as we get older, we lose that ability to heal. So that's why our joints hurt more, why if we cut ourselves, it takes longer to heal. And when we see the physical signs of aging, we start to get wrinkly. We look older and feel older because we lose this ability to repair and regenerate as we age. But what we've discovered is that you can take those young signals. So similar to my early experiments with the heart, if I can take those young heart signals and give it to an older heart and see repair and regeneration, we can take young signals. And in our case right now, we take it from birth tissue, and we can get into that in a moment. We take it from birth tissue, we purify it, and then we're able to give that to an injured individual to promote their tissue healing. So if they're in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they're not healing like they would normally in their teens or in their 20s, if we give these young signals from birth tissues, they're able to heal much faster and much more completely.
That's great. So you kind of touched on this already, but what are some of the most compelling applications of the regenerative therapies that Neobiosis is currently working on? And what kind of outcomes are you seeing for the patients that are utilizing it?
Yeah, well, what's exciting is that this modality works across a broad range of indications because really one of the main things that it does is it modulates inflammation. And many of the diseases that we see in the hospital are driven by inflammation. And so if we can correct inflammation that's dysregulated, we can treat a lot of indications like osteoarthritis, for example. So what these products do is they modulate inflammation. They don't turn off inflammation. They don't shut down the immune system. We don't want that at all. But what they do is they rebalance the immune system so that you can address autoimmune diseases. You can address burns and necrotic lesions that are non-healing because all of these together exhibit a sort of dysregulation of the immune system. So if you can rebalance the immune system and you can apply these products, then you can see incredible outcomes. And so we're seeing outcomes across a broad range of indications, everything from aesthetics, cosmetics, to arthritis, and as I mentioned, burns and non-healing wounds. We're seeing incredible results with those indications.
Great. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions or ethical considerations surrounding stem cell therapies that you often encounter? And how does your company Neobiosis address these to ensure patient safety and informed consent?
Well, that's a really good question. Actually, I'm going to answer that in two parts, if that's okay. The first way that I want to answer that question is that one of the biggest misconceptions that we come across is that there are stem cells involved in stem cell therapy. Because a lot of groups, a lot of sales reps, a lot of companies that are not necessarily educated in this space use buzzwords in order to get, into Google searches or to attract clients. But these products generally do not contain any stem cells. In fact, there's only really one product on the market that is a stem cell product, and that's Dasawa Muse cells. But everything else is typically either acellular, meaning there are no cells in it, it's just signaling, or it's a different type of cell, perhaps an MSC, a mesenchymal signaling cell. So there are actually no stem cells in these products. That's the biggest misconception, is that when people are spending this money and they're going abroad and spending tens of thousands of dollars because they're getting 100 million stem cells. Well, that's just not accurate. They are not getting any stem cells. In fact, If they're lucky, they're getting MSCs, but the cells are not typically analyzed. And so they're probably getting fibroblasts, which are no good for regenerative medicine. So the biggest misconception is that regenerative medicine is stem cell therapy. It is not stem cell therapy. When we talk about stem cell therapy, as does one of the companies that I work with, Ways to Well, when we talk about stem cell therapy there, we're talking about providing therapy for your stem cells inside your endogenous stem cells. So if we can give signals in the form of growth factors or exosomes, they provide the nourishment, the signals that your own stem cells, which are throughout your body, they supply the signals that they need. So stem cell therapy is therapy for your stem cells. You're not getting stem cells. So that's the biggest misconception. And then, of course, with that, a lot of people, when they hear stem cell, they think embryonic stem cell, and so that it's coming from a dead baby. That's absolutely not true. Unfortunately, there are some companies out there, again, typically without appropriate training and education, that do work with embryonic stem cells, but those are very dangerous. They can form what's called a teratoma, which is a type of cancer when you inject them into somebody's body, because they are a pluripotent stem cell that has this ability to form many different tissues, and they form a cancerous tissue when you inject it into somebody. So that's not what we do. It's on the very, very fringe. Very few people actually do that. And so when we get our products, we do get it from birth tissue, but it's after a full-term cesarean section. So the baby's born, it's healthy, it's happy. And then the birth tissue that's typically considered medical waste, that's thrown away, we're able to collect that. And if we process it a very specific way, we can remove the signals from that, and we can use that as a therapy. So that's the first main misconception, is that that regenerative medicine is stem cell therapy, and that perhaps those stem cells come from aborted fetuses. Absolutely not the case. The other misconception is that all of these types of products are created equal. And again, what I mentioned earlier was that my partner and I, he's an MD, I'm a PhD, I have a PhD in regenerative medicine, entered this space because we saw that there were a lot of, for lack of a better word, charlatans in the space that had no training, were not scientists, but they were selling products to patients and to physicians with buzzwords and claims that were not substantiated by the science. So the other misconception and concern for this industry is that not all products, not all companies are created equal, and it's very, very difficult often for patients and physicians to tell the difference.
Well, I appreciate you clearing that up. I think a lot of people have that misconception that you very greatly explained of stem cells are coming from, aborted fetus cells, and clearly that's the case. So running such a cutting edge company in a very regulated field like regenerative medicine must come with a lot of unique challenges. What are some of the biggest hurdles you faced in establishing Neobiosis, and how did you navigate them?
Well, that really goes back to the last question. The biggest hurdle that we faced is dealing with the competition, who are nefarious, that don't care about the rules, don't care about the regulations, claim to be FDA registered and inspected when they're not. That's really the biggest hurdle as a business owner in this space, is demonstrating that quality products from trained individuals should be considered superior over less expensive, unvalidated products from counterfeiters. This is a struggle that I face daily. How do I match or compete with a large marketing budget from some of these other companies that use a lot of the same words that we do, but there's just nothing behind them? How do I run a business where my business is established, yes, to make some money, but essentially to revolutionize medicine? That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to evolve medical care, and we're having to do that with a backdrop of these bad actors that are just trying to make a buck off of everybody else's coattails. It's very, very difficult for physicians and patients to know the difference. And so they've got to ask, very specific questions. Who's the scientist making the product? Where is the lab? Can I visit the lab? These kinds of things. So that's what we've adopted. That's one of the ways that we've tried to overcome those issues, is increasing our transparency. Come to see our lab, meet the scientists, view the products, see the FDA documents, that we've shared with the FDA, proving that we are FDA registered, proving that we've been FDA inspected, all of these things. We've had to adopt a certain layer of transparency that a lot of the bad actors navigate around because they don't want to be exposed.
I'm sure that has to be incredibly frustrating too, because that would taint, the
The whole
idea that
industry.
people have on your guys' industry.
Yeah, well, a lot of people, when they first hear about regenerative medicine, or they probably would hear stem cell therapy, is that it's snake oil and that it doesn't work. And it's really unfortunate because in many, many cases, it doesn't work because physicians are being sold on the cheapest product in the market. We can undercut anybody's prices. We're the cheapest on the market. Well, you get what you pay for, and when you're buying cheap biologic, it's risky, and often the results don't support the costs, and people complain online to their friends, to regulators, and then that gives the industry a very bad name. So we're trying to build an industry that is constantly being damaged, compromised by these bad actors that are only here to make money.
Yeah, that's horrible. It's just pretty much swimming upriver at that point.
Oh yeah, that's my everyday is swimming upriver against these guys. And the questions that I feel pretty much every day is, how are you guys different than these other guys? And so I have to give the same answers every single day. And it's great they're asking, but unfortunately, many don't. Many don't ask the question. And the fact that they have to ask the question means that it's not obvious. It's not obvious, the difference, even though to me, looking at a company that's hidden, that doesn't have an MD or a PhD running the company, these are the kinds of red flags that somebody using a biologic, because biologics can be very potent. And if you get it wrong, you can put people in the hospital. And that's what happened to Livion several years ago, was that they were pursuing money, revenue, rather than safety. They were taking too many shortcuts and ended up putting 19 people in the hospital, and the CEO went to federal prison. We need to see more of that, I think, in the industry, so that we can segregate out those that are compromising the safety of patients versus those that are revolutionizing this novel field of medicine.
Okay. I like to think the good guys always win. I know you guys are taking the right ethical approach to it all. So
I appreciate that.
just switching gears a little bit, how do you approach patient acquisition and physician partnerships for such specialized and innovative therapies? What strategies have been most effective in reaching those who could benefit or refer to Neobiosis?
Yeah, well, we never sell. Right. So Pascal and I got into this industry to help patients and to change medicine. And so we don't consider ourselves salesmen, so we don't sell. What we do is we inform. And this industry may be unique compared to other industries, I don't know. But what we've found is that just the sharing of information, which most people would covet and perhaps sell information, we've given it away. We just give it away. Having the experience that we have, we give it away. And so I get on stage as often as possible, and I talk about regenerative medicine and cellular therapies and acellular therapies. I educate on the science so that when a physician is interested in these kinds of modalities, they have a good foundation to understand how the biology works. If they're told by these sales reps from these other companies, here's a bunch of stem cells, how do they deploy them correctly if they don't understand what they're holding? Because they're not holding stem cells, that's for sure. And stem cells have a very specific biology. So if you think you're holding stem cells, you would use them a very specific way to take advantage of that biology. But if you don't have stem cells, you have exosomes or you have growth factors, you would use those in a very different way. And so the way that we have made partnerships and met physicians who have utilized our products very effectively is by educating them. We get on the stage and we say, this is a very complex industry and you've heard a lot of nonsense. Let's talk about the science. And so we talk about the science, and after that, you see the light bulbs going off. Now I understand how these products are applied. Now I can see how they could potentially help my patients. Let's talk about how we move forward.
That's great. And I find most of the best companies in the world always do education, and they're always confident in what they have to sell. And they're not, they're not trying to gatekeep anything. They're willing to share their knowledge and their trust. And people then in turn trust you, and then they want to, do deals with you. So that's great. For other leaders and founders in the healthcare and wellness space, considering pioneering new treatments or technologies, what advice would you give them about building a successful and ethical business beyond the current medical paradigm?
Well, you have to, there's no substitute for rigor. Scientific rigor is critical. And working with regulators who are trying to understand this space with the sort of speed that it's growing is always a challenge. So the way that we've approached it, at least, is being rigorous with our science, communicating our science, but also educating regulators. I work extensively at the state level to help regulators and lawmakers understand regenerative therapy, which they still call stem cell therapy, but that's okay. And we've written several laws that have been passed. Well, we've written several bills that have been passed into law in several states. And in fact, I've been advising the federal government on ways that we should be regulating these biologics to open up access, but at the same time, putting in appropriate guardrails to keep patients safe and to minimize the damage caused by the bad actors. So I've forgotten the question.
For other leaders, healthcare founders, what advice
what would they do to remain right? So where I was going with that is don't take any shortcuts. It's not a race to the bottom as far as pricing is concerned, and it's not about dominating the market share with product. It's about slow and steady wins the race. You've got to put the work in up front, and a lot of these companies do not. They dive in, they want to make as much money as they can before they get busted, and then they leave. But if you want to make a permanent mark in a new industry like this, you have to put the work in. I put 20 years of research and study into regenerative medicine before I started my company. I still do research, we still publish, and we communicate what we find with regulators. So the biggest advice I would have is study, research, publish, and help guide the lawmakers so that we're regulating appropriately, we're improving access, but we're not opening the floodgates to the bad actors. So you've really got to know your stuff. The product that you're making and you're selling, you have to know it inside and out. And unfortunately, especially in the medical industry, that's not always the case.
Yeah, especially too, you're dealing with people's lives here as well. That's not a
Yeah,
light.
it's not worth joking around. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't know how these groups can sleep at night knowing that they are not adhering to any of the regulations that are out there, any of the safety requirements. We saw a company not so long ago changing the expiration dates on their vials just to make a buck. They flooded the market with this out-of-date product, and they risk people's lives. Hopefully nothing happened, but they don't track it. So how do you know? If you don't have data tracking, you don't know which physicians are getting what product and then which patients receive it. You have no idea if it's harmed them, and you can't do a recall if you don't have that information. So those companies are what keep me up at night, because we see incredible outcomes for patients that receive appropriately manufactured product, and it just risks the safety of patients unnecessarily. I don't understand how people can sleep at night knowing that they're putting people at risk.
Well, unfortunately, not everyone sees the world through your ethical lens, unfortunately. And then that's also why we're here doing this podcast today, to help educate these people so that they don't get coerced or slimed into these companies that aren't doing their due diligence. But shifting gears here, let's talk more about the technology behind everything. So how does technology, and specifically advanced research, play a role in the continuous development and refinement of the therapies offered by your company?
Well, interestingly, amniotic fluid has been used in medicine for over 100 years. Technology is advancing very fast these days, but we're really using a modality that nature invented over the course of 7 million years of human evolution. If we're talking about modern humans, maybe 300,000 years. And it's been used in medicine that we are aware of for 100 years, and it's probably been used for thousands of years. I'm sure that our ancestors saw the beneficial effects of amniotic fluid and birth tissue. What we've done more recently is purify it. So remove some of the impurities so that we get a more consistent product. We reduce any of the risk, because, of course, if you take just unadulterated pure amniotic fluid, there can be risks associated with that. So because of our research and our understanding of the biology, we're able to get a very specific fraction of that amniotic fluid and see consistent and effective results. But as we study it more, what we're realizing is things like amniotic fluid is full of this protein called clotho. And clotho is being studied extensively in the longevity field right now as the longevity protein. It's the thing that seems to decrease as we get older. But if you supplement it back, as in the case of mice, you can increase the lifespan of mice by an additional 30%. And it seems to have effects in humans too. So what we find is that when we're first born, we have an abundance of chlortho, and as we get older and sicker, we don't have very much. But the amniotic fluid that we manufacture, the specific fraction that we make, is abundant in this chlortho, and it can be used as a therapeutic to improve the health of patients that receive it. So what we would like to do as technology advances is understand how things like chlortho interact with the body and interact with other growth factors that are present in the secretome, so this milieu of growth factors, and maybe find other modalities, find other treatments that we can adopt from this gift from nature, and we can maybe simplify it. We can maybe make it more effective, but I think that's how technology is going to be advancing with these therapies. They're a biology that's been with us for many, many years, but now we're using our knowledge to try to refine it and study it a little bit more closely.
That's great. So, what is your vision for the future of regenerative medicine? Do you see these therapies becoming a standard part of care for a wider range of conditions? And how do you envision technology, particularly AI, further shaping this field?
Yeah, I do see this becoming more mainstream. Right now you hear about Joe Rogan talking about it, and the Kardashians, and Aaron Rodgers, when he tore his Achilles tendon, was injected with our product, which accelerated, his healing. So, you hear about all these VIPs, but when is, the average Joe going to have access? Well, that's what we're trying to change. We're trying to bring down costs. We're trying to make it more accessible, again, without opening the floodgates to all the bad actors. But we're giving a lot of product away. We're studying how various indications respond to it. And with the data that we're collecting, we already have one clinical trial approved by the FDA, so that we can pursue this particular product VIX. So we're hoping that the more data we get, the finding is that they are incredibly safe, incredibly well tolerated, and very, very effective. And the price points are incredibly modest as well. So I think that as people learn that there are other modalities out there, more people will adopt it, more people will use it. It's going to be a word of mouth thing because people are going to see such great results. And as far as, AI and other technologies, well, as I said at the very beginning of the discussion, I'm interested in understanding how young signals that we have when we're younger and we lose when we're older can influence older individuals in their healing. And so my main interest is understanding the aging process and what is it about these young signals that affects the aging process. And I think that AI may be able to help substantially help us understand what's happening between the young individual and the old individual, what's happening in that period, what signals are we losing, what signals are we gaining, and how do we modulate those with products like amniotic fluid? What can we turn on, what can we turn off? And I think that that's going to really change how we view medicine.
Yeah, help identify those missing links for you guys, it sounds like.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So, how do you ensure Neobiosis is staying at the forefront of scientific discovery and continues to provide the highest quality and safest regenerative therapies?
Data, really. It's still about data. We study our products. We collaborate with groups at Harvard, at the University of Florida, at the University of Miami, and we generate data. We want to understand how these products are working and, of course, keep documenting the safety profile. But that's the only way that we can progress, is to rigorously and scientifically explore what these products are doing and the effects they're having on human biology. There's no other way around it. Just blindly selling a product because it makes somebody some money isn't going to improve the quality of healthcare. We're in a great space right now with these amazing products, and the only way to get better is to optimize them and to improve the outcomes over that which we're already observing and making them more accessible. Right now, because we don't really understand the biology fully, we're having to cryopreserve everything, and shipping it is a challenge. We were talking with groups in groups in the Ukraine about treating thermal burns on the battlefield, but logistically it was difficult getting the product there because while a lot of groups would lyophilize, which means freeze dry the product, we understood from our research and the research of others that does not maintain the product. It degrades, and so it doesn't really work as well. So as we evolve and improve the products and understand the products better, maybe we can store them in more convenient ways so that we can get them into the battlefield and we can get them to places where otherwise it might be difficult for like space, for example. We age much faster in space, and injuries become a much bigger problem in space because our immune system becomes compromised. And so if we get an injury in space, often it won't heal as well. So we want to be able to put those countermeasures in space. But right now, logistically, it's a challenge. So as we move forward, as we stay at the forefront, those are the kinds of things that we want to address is, how do we make these products more efficient, and how do we transport them better and get them out to the places we need to get them to?
Well, Dr. White, this conversation has been amazing. Thank you for taking your time to explain regenerative medicine to us, what to look out for, and what it truly is, not what the media portrays it to be. And for our listeners, looking to learn more about your company or just connect with you, where can they do so?
Yeah, if they'd like to know more, they can go to our website, which is neobiosis.com, Neobiosis. We also have a cosmetic product on the market. It's not available to customers directly. They have to go through a provider. But Lilium Pure is our website for the purified amniotic fluid and the chlortho-based products that are available. Also, follow me on LinkedIn. I speak publicly quite frequently. I appear on podcasts, and I always post anything that I'm doing on my LinkedIn. So if anybody's interested in knowing more about Neobiosis, about regenerative medicine in general, or what I'm up to, feel free to follow me on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you to everyone for tuning in. We'll catch you next time on Beyond the Clinic Walls.